Hello, everyone. I am the Sleeper Man, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. What if I told you that a house could drive its residents to the brink with just strange noises and creepy smells? Discover the terrifying true stories from a haunted college house, including flickering lights and items disappearing into the basement. Don't miss out on how these phenomena might be linked to an old, mysterious perfume. Find out why this could be the scariest sleep horror you've ever seen. I remember that weekend clearly. It was just me and my roommate left in that old, creaky house, with the others having moved out due to the strange happenings. It was late at night when I first noticed the door slamming. I'd been asleep for a few hours when the noise jolted me awake. It was a rhythmic, relentless banging coming from my roommate's room. I yelled, hoping to wake him up and stop the racket. But as soon as I did, the slamming stopped abruptly. I lay there in bed, listening to the unsettling silence. Then, I noticed something even more bizarre. The hippie beads hanging outside my door began to sway. It was like they were being pushed back and forth violently, though there was no breeze or draft to explain it. I sat up, my heart racing, and stared at those beads swaying furiously against the door frame. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only half an hour. Fear crept in as I debated whether to jump out of the window or just curl up and stay in bed. I could hardly think straight, my mind racing through every horror story I'd ever heard. All I wanted was for it to stop, for that relentless swaying to end so I could feel safe again. Eventually the movement ceased, and I clung to my bed, wrapped tightly in my blankets, listening to the rain sounds outside as if they were some kind of comforting lullaby. The next morning the house was still and eerily calm. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but the beads swaying and the door slamming were too vivid in my mind. I had hoped that maybe it was just my imagination, but I knew deep down that something was definitely wrong. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long night filled with more chilling experiences. The atmosphere in the house had already started to feel heavy, even though it was just the start of the day. The old walls seemed to hold on to every noise, every whisper, and every creak. I was about to discover just how unsettling the rest of the night would become. I was jolted awake again at 3 a.m. this time by the loud, unmistakable sound of Nintendo music blaring from the back porch. My first thought was that a drunk kid had broken into the house and started playing games, but it was so loud it felt like the game was right inside my room. I grabbed a bat, my nerves on edge, and cautiously made my way toward the back of the house. As I approached the back door, the music grew louder and more distorted, pounding in my ears. My pulse raced with every step, my mind replaying all the horror stories I'd ever heard about haunted houses and strange noises. I hesitated for a moment before flinging open the door, expecting to confront some unruly trespasser or malfunctioning speaker. To my surprise, the back porch was completely silent. The music had stopped the moment I opened the door, leaving an eerie quiet in its place. I stood there in the dark, bat in hand, trying to convince myself it was just a figment of my imagination or maybe an odd electrical glitch. But the silence was deafening, and the intensity of the previous noise made it all the more unnerving. I scanned the porch for any sign of disturbance but found nothing. No one was there, and no evidence of tampering with the Nintendo or any other device. I slowly retreated back into the house, the silence now feeling oppressive and unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the house was holding its breath, waiting for the next strange occurrence. The rest of the night passed in a haze of tension and unease. I lay awake, listening for any hint of the Nintendo music returning or any other signs that the house was alive with its own eerie rhythms. The rain sounds outside provided little comfort, blending with my racing thoughts and the growing realization that the house had secrets I couldn't easily explain. The next day, I decided to have a few friends over, hoping their presence might bring some normalcy to the house. I told them about the strange occurrences, and of course they laughed it off as a bunch of spooky stories. Determined to prove that the house was indeed haunted, I challenged whatever was causing the disturbances to make itself known. It wasn't long before my challenge was answered in the most dramatic way possible. As we all sat in the living room, chatting and laughing, The lights began to flicker wildly. At first, it was subtle, just a slight stutter in the illumination, but within moments, the flickering intensified, turning into a rapid strobe effect. It was broad daylight outside, so there was no reason for the lights to behave this way. My friends fell silent, their eyes widening as they watched the bizarre spectacle unfold. For a solid minute, the lights flashed on and off, plunging the room into unsettling shadows and then bright bursts of light. It was a sight straight out of a true ghost horror story, with each flicker casting eerie patterns on the walls. My friends, who had previously dismissed my claims, were now visibly shaken, their skepticism giving way to apprehension. When the lights finally stabilized, a heavy silence settled over the room. My friends exchanged nervous glances, clearly unnerved by what they had witnessed. It was as if the house had just put on a show, demonstrating its eerie power and confirming the ghostly presence I had been talking about. The flickering lights had provided undeniable proof of the supernatural, leaving everyone in a state of uncomfortable disbelief. Later that night, I couldn't help but notice the strong, flowery scent of old lady perfume lingering in the house, adding to the already tense atmosphere. This was a scent I had grown accustomed to, always accompanying the strange occurrences. It seemed like the house itself was intent on making sure we never forgot the strange events that unfolded within its walls. As the night wore on, the house seemed to grow more restless. My roommate and I had always tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but that night everything felt different, more intense. I decided to stay up, determined to confront whatever was causing the disturbances. I knew the house had a door built into the floor that led to the basement, but we always kept it covered with a rug, partly out of sight and mind. Earlier in the day, I had noticed that some of our belongings had gone missing, only to reappear in the basement. This had happened so many times that Wed started to believe it was just a quirk of the house. Now, with everything that had been happening, it felt like more than just coincidence. I decided to investigate, feeling a mix of dread and determination. The old coal chute in the basement had always been a source of unease for me. It was a remnant from when the house was heated by coal, and it had a way of making everything feel more sinister. I went to the basement, the strong, flowery perfume filling the air once again, amplifying the already eerie atmosphere. I could hear faint thumps coming from above, as if something or someone was moving around in the attic. I tried to ignore the thumps as I rummaged through the basement. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but then I saw a pile of items that had gone missing, things we had long forgotten about. The basement felt colder than usual, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I quickly grabbed the items, feeling like I was being watched, though I knew it was just the anxiety and fear playing tricks on me. Returning upstairs, I found my roommate sitting in the dark, looking pale and shaken. He had experienced something unsettling of his own. While playing video games late at night, he had seen a misty figure moving from the kitchen to the bathroom. The bathroom had a trap door leading to the attic, and we had always suspected that this was where the ghost liked to linger. We both knew that the house had one more secret to reveal, but we also knew we had reached the limit of what we could handle. The rest of the night was filled with the unsettling noises of the house, the thumps from the attic, the flickering lights, and the occasional scent of perfume. As dawn approached, I found myself on the front porch, waiting for the sun to rise, my mind racing through the night's events. The house had shown us its true nature, leaving us with a chilling reminder that it was far from empty, and perhaps it never would be. What if I told you your dream cabin in the woods could turn into your worst nightmare? In this video, I am going to take you through a terrifying night where a peaceful getaway became a fight for survival. If you've ever thought about escaping city life for a quiet retreat, you need to know the chilling truth before it's too late. Stick around, because what happened inside that cabin might just change the way you look at solitude forever. The moment I pulled up to the cabin, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. It was everything I'd imagined when I inherited the money, a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from the buzz of the city. The rain started to drizzle just as I stepped out of the car, casting a soothing sound over the dense forest. For a second I thought, this might be the perfect place for peace, but there was something about the cabin that felt off. The real estate agent, an older man with thinning hair, greeted me with an overly forced smile. He seemed jumpy, constantly glancing around, especially towards the tree line. "You're going to love it," he said, his voice lacking conviction. As we walked through the front door, the faint scent of must and damp wood hit me. The cabin was bigger than I expected, with furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The previous owners had left everything behind, from the old leather couch to the faded family portraits that lined the walls. "This place is a gem," the agent muttered, but I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He showed me around quickly, his eyes darting to the windows. When we reached the back hallway, I noticed his hands trembling as he handed me the keys. "If you need anything, just, call." With that, he practically ran out, leaving me alone in the stillness of the cabin. The rain outside intensified, creating a soft drumming against the roof, like an endless sleep aid, perfect for a long night, or so I thought. I wandered the cabin, taking it all in. There was something oddly calming about the rain sounds, a rhythm that made the woods feel alive, but there was also a creeping discomfort that lingered in the corners of my mind. The furniture was old, mismatched, and every room had its own eerie charm. It was like stepping into a forgotten time, and that unnerved me. Still, I told myself that this was what I needed: space, solitude, and a break from the stress of urban life. This would be the place where I'd find some peace, despite the unsettling aura. As night fell, I explored deeper into the cabin. In the back room, hidden behind a heavy bookshelf, I found an old wooden door. It was different from the others, smaller and almost forgotten. Curiosity got the better of me, and with some effort, I managed to push it open. Behind it, steep stairs led into a basement, cold air creeping up from below. I hesitated, then grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and descended. What I found in the basement sent a chill down my spine. There were shelves upon shelves of books, old, dusty, and all about magic, spirituality, and something darker. One book in particular caught my eye. It wasn't about stories or legends. It was a diary. The leather was cracked, the pages brittle. Flipping through, I found entries about the cabin. A curse, an evil spirit. Each word seemed more desperate than the last. My hands trembled as I read the final warning. "Leave, now." The rain picked up outside, and suddenly the soothing sound of it felt oppressive, almost mocking. I bolted back up the stairs, heart pounding. As I tried to open the front door to leave, the strangest thing happened. It wouldn't budge. No matter how much I pulled, it felt like the cabin was trapping me inside. I ran to the back door. Same thing. It didn't make sense. I should have been able to leave, but no matter what door I tried, I always ended up in the same room. I couldn't shake the eerie sensation that the cabin itself was alive, bending time and space to trap me. I checked the front door again, and then the windows. No luck. My heartbeat was hammering in my chest as I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the rain was messing with the wood, swelling the doors shut. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the less it made sense. Rain sounds shouldn't make doors impossible to open. The flashlight flickered as I stood in the living room, now littered with shadows cast by old lamps and forgotten furniture. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the floorboards beneath me, the faint rustle of wind against the cabin's walls. I tried to sit down, telling myself that I just needed to wait for morning. But the diary I found wouldn't leave my mind. What kind of curse was this? And what exactly was I up against? Out of nowhere, a loud crash echoed from the basement. It was so sudden, I nearly dropped the flashlight. My pulse quickened as I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what could have caused the noise. Maybe an old shelf fell, or worse, maybe there was someone else here with me. I considered my options: go back down and investigate, or stay put and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But deep down, I knew ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. I had to see what was going on. The basement stairs creaked as I descended, the air thick with a damp chill that clung to my skin. The flashlight beam wavered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. I reached the bottom and quickly scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place except for one small detail: a book had fallen off the shelf. But it wasn't just any book. It was the diary, the one that warned me to leave. My hands shook as I picked it up, noticing that it had fallen open to a new page I hadn't read before. Scrawled in messy handwriting, it read, "It won't let you leave, not until it has what it wants." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was playing with me, drawing me deeper into its twisted game. I bolted back upstairs, barely able to hold onto the flashlight as I stumbled into the living room. The rain was relentless now, pounding against the cabin as if it were trying to get in. I stood there, breathless, every nerve on edge. The cabin felt smaller, darker, as though it were closing in around me. My only hope was to survive the night. I barricaded myself in the bedroom, pushing the old dresser against the door. There had to be a way out of this. I refused to believe I was truly trapped. Yet every time I looked at that diary, I felt the walls pressing in tighter. The rain had once been a sleep aid, but now it was just another element in this nightmare. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the flashlight like it was my only lifeline, waiting for whatever came next. But deep down, I knew something was watching. I just couldn't see it. The rain didn't let up. It was like an endless drumming, pounding on the cabin from all sides. My heart raced as I sat in the dark, staring at the door. The barricade felt weak, just a flimsy dresser and some old chairs. Every sound seemed amplified, like the rain had turned the night into some twisted horror story. I tried to calm myself by thinking of true stories I'd heard about people who survived nights like this. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't anything I'd ever heard of in any scary stories or even imagined. The cabin seemed alive, almost breathing with the storm. At one point, I could have sworn I heard footsteps outside the bedroom door. Soft and deliberate. My breathing hitched. I was gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was irrational, I thought. There was no one here, but the sound of slow, measured steps, like someone or something was pacing just outside, became unmistakable. Then, without warning, a loud bang hit the door. My heart nearly stopped. Something was trying to get in. The dresser shook with each hit, the old wood creaking and groaning under the pressure. I scrambled back on the bed, flashlight shaking in my hand, pointing it wildly at the door as if it could protect me. The banging stopped as suddenly as it had started, and then an eerie silence. No rain, no wind, just silence, heavy and unnatural. It felt like the calm before a storm. In the eerie quiet, I could hear something breathing, not mine. Something deeper, slow, and deliberate. It was in the room. I turned the flashlight toward the corner, half expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, but the beam landed on something dark. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, stood there, not moving, not speaking, just watching. My skin crawled. I wanted to scream, but fear had frozen my voice. As my eyes adjusted, the figure seemed to shift, almost blending into the darkness, like it was made of the shadows themselves. Then, it stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. My whole body tensed as I backed further into the corner of the bed. But there was nowhere to go. The door behind the barricade suddenly rattled again, but now it was too late to escape. The figure came closer, its presence suffocating, as though it were drawing all the air out of the room. I could hear whispers now, soft and unintelligible, swirling around my head, telling me things I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. It was coming for me. In a panic, I grabbed the diary from the nightstand, flipping it open, hoping to find anything that could help. My eyes landed on the words, "It feeds on fear. Fight it, or be consumed." But how was I supposed to fight something like this? The figure loomed over me, and I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on my chest. My pulse raced, my breath came in short gasps, and I realized this was it. Either I found a way to break free, or I wouldn't make it to morning. I don't know what made me do it, but in that moment of terror, I threw the diary at the figure. It passed through the dark mass as if it wasn't even there, landing with a hollow thud against the wall. The shadow didn't flinch. It just kept coming, relentless, inching closer. The whispers grew louder, like 1,000 voices all talking at once, pushing me to the edge of madness. This was no sleep horror. This was real. It was the kind of nightmare that no bedtime stories or rain sounds could soothe. I backed further into the corner, pressing myself against the wall, trying to think. My mind raced. I needed to remember what the diary said, how it fed on fear, but fear was all I had. My hands were trembling, and I was paralyzed by the very thing that gave it power. Then, as if on instinct, I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe, steady and slow. It was almost impossible, but I knew I had to stop panicking. I had to take control. I could feel the entity closing in, its presence crushing, but I focused on the sound of my breathing. Inhale, exhale, slowly, rhythmically. The whispers, the darkness, everything felt like it was tightening around me, squeezing the last bit of hope from my chest. But with each breath, the whispers began to fade, and the suffocating weight of the shadow seemed to lessen. I opened my eyes again, daring to face the darkness. The figure was still there, but it had stopped. It loomed just a few feet away, as if it was waiting for something, as if it had lost its grip on me. I don't know why, but I found the strength to stand. My legs were shaking, and I felt like I might collapse at any second, but I wasn't going to let it win. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice shaky but determined. "You're just fear. You can't have me." As soon as the words left my mouth, the figure seemed to recoil, shrinking back into the shadows. I watched, my heart pounding as it melted away into the darkness. The whispers were gone, replaced by the distant sound of the rain outside, now soft and rhythmic. The cabin was still again. I stood there in the dark, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The entity, whatever it was, had retreated, but I knew it wasn't gone for good. I could feel its presence lingering, waiting for another moment of weakness. By the time dawn broke, I had packed my things. I wasn't staying here another night. The rain had stopped, and as the light filtered through the windows, I could finally see the cabin for what it was. A place trapped in time, with secrets that should have never been unearthed. I didn't care what the real estate agent had to say, and I didn't care about the money ID spent. This place was cursed, and nothing would change that. As I drove away from the cabin, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadow following me down the road. But there was nothing, just the empty woods and the fading memory of that terrifying night. I didn't need to look back. Some places are better left behind, their stories buried in the dark where they belong. Sometimes, the scariest tales aren't the ones you hear, they're the ones you live. And this one would haunt me for the rest of my life. The kind of story that finds a place deep in your soul and never lets go. Ever wondered what it's like to face your darkest fears on the road? This video takes you through a spine-tingling true story of a man grappling with guilt and a terrifying creature that controls the night. Discover how a seemingly normal night turns into a harrowing fight for survival and redemption. Watch until the end to find out how this eerie confrontation leads to an explosive and unexpected finale. The rain had been coming down for hours, steady and relentless, a perfect soundtrack for my escape. It was just me, my truck, and the barren stretch of road that disappeared into the night. The only company I had was the quiet hum of the engine and the constant tapping of rain on the windshield. It was one of those nights where the world felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and the memories of my family. They were gone because of me, and no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't outrun the guilt. The darkness outside was thick, broken only by the occasional flicker of lightning, casting fleeting shadows across the road. I had the radio on low, playing some static-filled station that only added to the eerie atmosphere. I was trying to distract myself with random horror stories, the kind that normally wouldn't get under my skin. But tonight, everything felt different. The rain sounds, usually calming, made the loneliness in the cab more suffocating. Every mile felt like it was taking me deeper into something I couldn't quite explain. Then I saw it, just up ahead, caught in the beam of my headlights for a split second. A figure standing at the side of the road. I barely had time to register the red eyes staring back at me before it vanished into the night. My heart jumped into my throat, and I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the wet pavement. I gripped the wheel, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I thought I saw. But the image was burned into my mind, those eyes, glowing like embers, full of something unnatural. I stayed there for a moment, listening to the rain as it drummed on the roof, my heart pounding louder in my ears. "It's just in your head," I muttered to myself. Too many scary stories, too many sleepless nights. But something about those eyes, it didn't feel like a figment of my imagination. There was something out here, and whatever it was, it had seen me. I started driving again, but the sense of unease stayed with me, growing stronger with every passing mile. My headlights flickered once, then twice, before going completely dark. For a brief moment, the only light came from the occasional flash of lightning. I cursed under my breath and pulled off to the side of the road. I knew I couldn't drive in this storm without lights, so I decided to wait it out, hoping the truck would start working again soon. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, listening to the rain sounds and hoping the headlights would come back on. Time moved strangely when you were out here alone, like the road itself was stretching, warping reality. Just as I was considering trying to restart the engine, I spotted the dim glow of a neon sign in the distance, a gas station. It felt like a lifeline. Without much thought, I turned the key, and miraculously, the truck sputtered to life, the headlights flickering back on just enough to light my way. The place looked abandoned, worn down by years of neglect. The windows were grimy, and the fluorescent lights inside buzzed weakly. I parked under the awning, trying to shake off the nerves that had been growing ever since I'd seen that thing on the road. As I stepped out of the truck, I noticed the gas pump was one of those old-fashioned ones, the kind you don't see anymore, and the smell of damp asphalt filled the air. I headed inside, hoping to find someone who could tell me what the hell was happening. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I was greeted by the bored eyes of the cashier behind the counter. There were two other people inside, a trucker sitting in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee, and a woman flipping through a magazine by the snack aisle. The place had an eerie stillness, as if time had stopped the moment I walked in. It reminded me of those old scary tales where people stumble upon a forgotten town that's hiding something dark. "Anything wrong out there?" the cashier asked, barely looking up from the small TV behind the counter, which was flickering with static. "Lights were out on the road," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Saw something strange too, maybe an animal, I don't know." The trucker glanced up, his eyes narrowing as if he'd been waiting for me to say something like that. "You saw it, didn't you?" His voice was gruff, but there was a hint of fear in it, like he knew exactly what I was talking about. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. "Yeah, red eyes standing on the side of the road." The woman by the snacks looked up, her face pale. "I saw it too," she said quietly. "It was just standing there watching, like it knew we were coming." The trucker nodded, setting his coffee down. "You're not the first. That thing's been out here for weeks now. No one knows what it is, but everyone who sees it ends up having problems. Electrical problems. Mostly headlights flickering, radios cutting out, things like that." A chill ran down my spine. The lights above us flickered for a brief second, casting long shadows across the room. The trucker and the woman exchanged uneasy glances. "You'd best get out of here as soon as you can," the cashier muttered, turning up the volume on his TV, though it was nothing but static now. "This ain't a place to be lingering." I felt a knot of tension tighten in my stomach. The station was unsettling, with its flickering lights and the quiet hum of anxiety among the people inside. I glanced outside through the dirty windows, my gaze catching the rain lashing against the glass, and the shadows dancing under the weak glow of the gas station sign. I knew I needed to get out of there, but the thought of heading back onto that dark, empty road made me hesitate. As I prepared to leave, a sudden blackout plunged the entire gas station into darkness. The fluorescent lights above us blinked out completely. The storm outside seemed to rage even harder, adding to the sense of foreboding. The sudden loss of power made everyone jump, their murmurs of concern mixing with the low crackle of static from the TV behind the counter. "What's going on?" the woman asked, her voice tinged with panic. I could hear the trucker mumbling to himself, cursing under his breath. "It's that thing," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's messing with the power. Always does when it shows up." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wasn't sure what was worse, the thought of the creature outside, or the idea that it had the ability to control the power. I tried to keep calm, though my hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone to use as a flashlight. As I shone the light around the room, I saw the anxiety etched on everyone's faces. The cashier was pacing behind the counter, and the trucker was now standing by the door, peering out into the storm. The woman was clutching her magazine tightly, her knuckles white. The power came back on just as abruptly as it had gone out, but the lights flickered erratically, casting a strobe-like effect across the room. Every time the lights blinked, I caught glimpses of the creature standing in the shadows just outside. Its red eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it seemed to be drawing energy from the station itself, feeding off the fear it caused. I knew I had to act fast. The more I stayed here, the more I risked being trapped by whatever was out there. I glanced at the others, who seemed equally paralyzed by fear. It was clear that we were all in this together, but no one knew how to deal with the terror that was stalking us. The power surged once more, and for a moment, the lights in the station were steady. It felt like a fleeting reprieve from the madness. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my courage. I knew that if I didn't confront the creature now, I'd be stuck in this nightmare forever. The others, huddled together in fear, looked at me with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Look," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We need to get out of here. If we stay, it's only going to get worse." The trucker nodded slowly, and the woman clutched her bag tightly, as if ready to bolt at a moment's notice. I didn't wait for a response. I moved toward the door, pushing through the heavy silence that hung over us. As soon as I stepped outside, the full fury of the storm hit me. The rain pounded down, and the wind howled, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on the creature standing at the edge of the station's lot, its red eyes glowing with an almost malevolent satisfaction. It seemed to sense my determination and moved closer, its form shifting and undulating as if it was made of darkness itself. I made my way back to my truck, struggling against the wind and the rain. I could hear the creature's footsteps now, heavier than the storm's roar, as if it were following me. I started the engine, but the truck shuddered and coughed, the electrical problems from earlier resurfacing. My heart raced as I realized I couldn't escape through normal means. I had to face it, not just for myself, but for the others trapped in the station. The creature was upon me now, its eyes a searing red in the stormy night. I took one last look back at the gas station, where the figures of the trucker and the woman were silhouetted against the flickering lights. I knew I had to end this. I grabbed a flare from the truck's emergency kit and lit it, using it as a beacon of hope. I hurled it toward the creature, the flare's bright light casting long, strange shadows as it arced through the rain. The flare hit the creature and exploded into a burst of flame and light. For a brief, blinding moment, the creature's eyes flared with an intense heat, and the darkness seemed to scream and protest. The ground beneath it caught fire, and the creature writhed, its form breaking apart in the inferno. I watched as the flames consumed it, my own sense of guilt and fear burning away with it. The fire roared louder than the storm, and as I stood there watching it, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm continued to rage, but I had finally faced my own demons. The creature was gone, and so was my unbearable guilt. The night ended with the storm still howling, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was still dark, but as I drove away from the blazing inferno, I knew I had crossed a line. I had faced my fears and made a choice, and in doing so, found a semblance of redemption. What if I told you that the scariest night of your life could start with something as simple as a power outage? In this video, we dive into a terrifying tale of a group of friends trapped in a room with whispers from the walls and a chilling disappearance. Discover the real-life horror elements that made this night unforgettable, and find out why you won't want to miss the shocking twist that awaits at the end. Stay tuned to uncover the terrifying truth behind the whispers and shadows. I always thought the old school building was just that old and a bit creepy. Nothing more, but as I stood in the empty classroom, a chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the eeriness of the room itself. It was the kind of night where the rain sounds pelted against the windows in a steady rhythm, making it feel like the world outside had disappeared. The only light came from the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. Hannah, with her usual air of superiority, had insisted we stay late to prove our loyalty to her. We had to help with the decoration for the upcoming school event. even though it was supposed to be a simple task. The other girls and I had been trying to get everything done quickly, all the while watching the clock, hoping to get out of there soon. I felt the tension in my stomach, knowing that Hana was never one to tolerate sloppiness or delays. It was then that Hana's laughter broke the silence, a sound that seemed out of place in the otherwise quiet room. She had been cruel to Shizuko, the quiet girl who always seemed to be hiding in the background. Shizuko had always been an easy target for Hana and her gang, but tonight felt different. Something about the way Hana was mocking her. It didn't just feel mean. It felt like it had an edge of something darker. I noticed Shizuko sitting alone in the corner of the room, her shoulders hunched as she tried to avoid the jabs from Hana. I wanted to say something, to reach out to her, but I knew better. If I spoke up, Hana would turn her anger on me. The fear of being ostracized, of facing Hana's wrath, kept me silent. I had distanced myself from Shizuko in the past to fit in with Hana's crowd, and now I regretted it more than ever. Just as the clock struck midnight, the room seemed to grow colder. The rain sounds outside had turned into a heavy downpour, and the wind howled through the old window panes. It felt as if the walls were closing in, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. The night had taken on a different quality, and as the group of us continued working, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further as the clock ticked on. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the dim light. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my mind kept drifting back to Shizuko. I glanced over at her, noticing how she seemed even more withdrawn than usual, as if she was shrinking into herself. Hana's taunts had become more vicious, and I could see the strain on Shizuko's face. It wasn't just the weather that was making me uneasy. The walls of the classroom seemed to be whispering now, an unsettling sound that was almost imperceptible over the rain sounds outside. At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I noticed that the others were becoming uneasy too. They were shifting in their seats, exchanging worried glances, as if they could sense something wrong but couldn't quite put their finger on it. The whispers grew louder, a faint murmur that seemed to come from within the very walls of the room. Hana continued to taunt Shizuko, oblivious to the change in the atmosphere. Her laughter echoed unnervingly, blending with the whispers and creating an almost surreal experience. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work, but the sound was becoming harder to ignore. It was as if the walls were trying to communicate something that I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp filled the air, and I heard the others scrambling to turn on their phones for light. The flickering lights had made the shadows dance wildly on the walls, creating shapes that seemed to twist and writhe. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the fear rising like a tide. Hana's voice cut through the darkness, demanding that we stay calm, but her bravado did little to reassure us. In the pitch black, I felt a presence, a coldness that seemed to seep into my bones. It was as if something or someone was in the room with us, something that we couldn't see but could definitely feel. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and it was clear that they weren't just in our heads. I glanced at Shizuko, who was now huddled in a corner, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, and I knew that whatever was happening, it was more than just a power outage and some spooky whispers. The silence that followed the power outage was thick and oppressive. It seemed to press down on us, making it hard to breathe. I could hear the faint, rhythmic dripping of water from a leak somewhere in the room, blending with the continued murmur from the walls. The whispers were no longer a faint sound. They were now a clear, almost intelligible cacophony. It felt like they were closing in on us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Hana's authoritative voice broke through the tension as she barked orders, trying to keep everyone calm, but her usual confidence was faltering. I could hear the strain in her voice, a tremor that was completely out of character. The others were scared too, their nervous chatter and occasional cries of surprise adding to the chaos. I felt a pang of guilt for not speaking up earlier, for not standing up for Shizuko, but right now, I was too scared to do anything but try to stay composed. In the darkness, I saw a faint light from one of the phone screens bobbing toward Shizuko. As I squinted to see, I noticed something strange. Shizuko wasn't moving. Her head was turned towards the corner, and she seemed to be staring at something that wasn't there. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow, as if she was in a state of shock or terror. It made me uneasy. I wanted to reach out to her, but something held me back. Then, as if on cue, the faint light from the phone flickered and went out. The whispers intensified, now sounding like a jumble of urgent voices. I could hear Shizuko's soft whimpers growing louder, but I couldn't see her anymore. Panic began to rise as I fumbled with my own phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. When I finally managed to get it working, the beam revealed that Shizuko was gone. Her seat was empty, and the corner where she had been was now eerily vacant. The realization hit me hard. Shizuko was missing, vanished into thin air. I heard the other girls starting to cry and shout, their voices blending with the rising panic. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead, and my heart pounded in my chest. The darkness, the whispers, and now the disappearance of Shizuko, it was all too much. The night had turned into a nightmare, and there was no way out of it. As the fear gripped me, I knew we had to find out what was happening before it was too late. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the shadows stretching and shrinking as if they had a life of their own. My flashlight trembled in my hands, casting frantic beams of light that barely pierced the darkness. Panic had taken over, and I could barely think straight. The whispers continued their relentless murmur, creating a sense of urgency that pressed heavily on my chest. We searched frantically, calling out Shizuko's name, but the darkness swallowed our voices. The rain outside had turned into a torrential downpour, and its drumming on the windows created a deafening backdrop. Each time we thought we heard a sound or saw a movement, it turned out to be nothing. The room seemed endless, the corners never ending, as if we were trapped in a maze that defied reality. As the minutes dragged on, Hana's usual bravado had vanished entirely. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. The facade of her superiority was gone, replaced by raw terror. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at her vulnerability, but it was overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of dread. The night was dragging on, and the situation was becoming increasingly dire. Then, amidst the chaos, I noticed something strange. The whispers had suddenly stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. I turned around, shining my flashlight towards the center of the room, and there on the floor where Shizuko had been sitting was a strange, dark stain. It was too dark to be from the rain, and it seemed to be spreading slowly, almost like it was alive. My heart sank as I realized the stain resembled the outline of a person. The whispers began again, louder and more urgent than before, but they now seemed to be coming from inside my head. I could hear Shizuko's voice, faint and distorted, pleading for help. The realization struck me hard. Whatever was in that room was not just supernatural, it was using Shizuko's voice to communicate. We huddled together, each of us gripping our phones and shining our lights on the dark stain. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single chilling voice that seemed to resonate with the very walls. It was clear that the room was alive with something malevolent, something that had taken Shizuko and was now toying with us. As the night wore on, we never found Shizuko. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the rain-soaked windows, the room was eerily quiet. The stain had vanished, and the whispers had stopped. The rain sounds outside had faded to a gentle patter, leaving us with only the sound of our own breaths and the occasional sob. The experience left us shaken, with more questions than answers. The room seemed to have returned to normal, but the memory of that night would haunt us forever. As we left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that we had glimpsed something far beyond our understanding. The horror stories of that night would linger in our minds, becoming a true scary tale of our own. The rain, the whispers, the disappearing girl, each element was a part of a narrative that we would recount for years, always wondering what had really happened in that dark, silent room. Ever wondered what it's like to show a house with a chilling secret? In this video, you'll hear the true story of a real estate agent who faces unsettling noises and eerie feelings while trying to sell a haunted property. If you've ever felt uneasy about old buildings or experienced unexplained disturbances, this story will keep you on edge. Stick around to find out what happens when the past won't stay buried. The old house stood like a relic from a past that most people wanted to forget. I'd been trying to sell it for months, and despite the recent renovations, it had become something of a hard sell. As a real estate agent, I faced my fair share of challenging properties, but this one was different. It wasn't just the location, it was the reputation. I chose to ignore the whispers of what had happened here decades ago, hoping that a fresh coat of paint and some new fixtures would do the trick. Today was no different. The couple who had shown interest over the phone were arriving. Mr. and Mrs. Grant seemed genuinely intrigued as they pulled up in their SUV. I greeted them with my most professional smile, though a knot of unease had formed in my stomach. This house had a way of making me feel uncomfortable, especially the attic. Even after the renovations, that attic had an air about it, an air that I couldn't quite shake. As we walked through the house, I did my best to highlight the positive aspects. I pointed out the spacious living room, the updated kitchen, and the well-maintained garden. The house had a lot to offer, and I was determined to sell it, despite my growing apprehension. The attic, however, was something I tried to avoid mentioning. I knew from experience that it was best to steer clear of certain topics. The couple seemed taken with the house. They wandered from room to room, discussing their plans and imagining their lives in the space. I answered their questions, my mind racing. I was careful not to let my unease show. The sounds of their footsteps echoed in the old house, blending with the occasional creak of the wooden floors. Outside, rain began to fall, adding a somber soundtrack to the visit. As the tour came to an end, Mr. and Mrs. Grant seemed enthusiastic. They mentioned making an offer, which was a relief. I had hoped for a positive outcome, but a strange sound from somewhere within the house made my heart race. It was a subtle noise, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I tried to focus on the promising news from the couple, but the unsettling sound lingered in my mind. The rain outside had picked up, drumming a steady rhythm against the windows. It was a soothing, almost hypnotic sound, but inside the house, the atmosphere felt anything but peaceful. After the Grants left, I was alone in the house for a few minutes, a fact that never sat well with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, especially with that noise still echoing in my head. I decided to check the house one last time before heading out. The rain's steady percussion seemed to fill the space, amplifying every creak and groan of the old structure. As I moved from room to room, I felt a growing tension in the pit of my stomach. I had to inspect the attic, but the thought made me hesitate. I knew the attic was a crucial selling point, but something about it made my skin crawl. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway to the attic was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering bulb at the end of the corridor. The rain sounds outside were muffled up here, creating an eerie silence that seemed to press against my ears. I reached the attic door and hesitated, listening for any hint of the strange sound I'd heard earlier. The only sound now was the persistent patter of rain. Taking a deep breath, I opened the attic door. The space was cluttered with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. I moved through it carefully, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural entities, but there was something about this place that played tricks on my mind. The attic was just as ID left it. Nothing seemed out of place, but the strange noise from before was still unaccounted for. As I was about to leave, I heard it again, a faint whispering sound, like a soft sigh of wind. I spun around, my heart pounding. The attic was empty, and I was alone. The rain continued its relentless drumming, almost as if mocking my growing unease. I forced myself to leave, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The night had fully descended, and the rain was now a constant, soothing presence outside. As I locked up the house, I couldn't help but replay the day's events in my mind. The Grants had shown genuine interest, and it seemed like this might finally be the sale I needed. But the lingering sense of discomfort, particularly with the attic, made it hard to fully embrace the optimism. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that makes you second-guess every sound. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, my nerves jangling with each click. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was ridiculous I was the only one in the house, but the echoes of those footsteps The strange noises and the persistent whisper seemed to follow me. I decided to head to the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea. The act of making tea was meant to be comforting, a small ritual to calm my nerves. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I noticed something odd. The kitchen light flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on the walls. It wasn't the rain causing it. The power had been checked recently. A sharp, unsettling noise came from the hallway, a loud thump that made me jump. I spun around, heart racing. The house was still, and the rain's rhythmic sound was the only thing breaking the silence. I cautiously walked towards the sound, feeling like I was moving in slow motion. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing unusual. Returning to the kitchen, I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just the house settling or the old pipes making noise, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger, an oppressive weight that settled on my shoulders. I was sure it was just my imagination, heightened by the day's events, but it didn't make the feeling any less real. I finished my tea quickly, feeling a need to leave the house as soon as possible. As I gathered my things, I heard it again, the faint whispering sound, now unmistakably close. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The sound seemed to be coming from the attic. I knew I had to get out, but something made me pause, as if the house itself was holding me captive. The wind howled outside, the rain beating against the windows like a relentless drum. I stood in the hallway, the chilling whisper from the attic still fresh in my ears. Every fiber of my being told me to leave immediately, but I couldn't shake the sense of responsibility. The house needed to be sold, and I had to ensure everything was in order. The thought of letting a potential buyer down, or worse, having to relive this eerie experience, was unbearable. Summoning all my courage, I decided to confront whatever was causing the disturbance. I grabbed a flashlight and headed back up to the attic. My footsteps seemed to echo through the empty house, each creak of the floorboards magnified by the oppressive silence. The flickering kitchen light seemed like a distant memory now, overshadowed by the growing sense of dread. The attic was as I had left it, still and silent, save for the constant rain sounds outside. I scanned the room with the flashlight, hoping to find a logical explanation for the unsettling noises. The light flickered again, and I noticed a box near the far corner that seemed slightly out of place. My heart raced as I approached it, expecting the worst. I opened the box, revealing old linens and dusty clothes. Nothing seemed amiss until I noticed a small, antique-looking object buried under the fabrics. It was a faded photograph of a family, their faces obscured but clearly showing a moment of joy. I couldn't tell why, but the photograph seemed oddly out of place, almost as if it didn't belong in that box or in this house. Just then I heard the noise again, a soft scraping sound, like something being moved across the floor. I whipped around, my flashlight beamed darting across the attic. The sound stopped abruptly, and I was left with the heavy silence of the old house. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief. The photograph and the sounds were unsettling, but they seemed to explain the feeling of unease I'd been experiencing. I decided to leave the house for good that night. As I locked up and stepped into the rain, the oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to lift. I realized that, while I might not have understood everything that had happened, the important thing was that I was leaving it behind. I hoped that the Grants, or whoever would eventually live there, would find what they were looking for. As I drove away, the house faded into the rain-soaked night, leaving me with a mix of relief and lingering curiosity. What if I told you there's a way to resolve haunting ghost stories and help restless spirits find peace? In this video, you'll discover the chilling tale of a professor who bridges the gap between the living and the dead, facing the real consequences of unresolved tragedies. Don't miss out on learning how you can understand these eerie encounters and avoid the haunting repercussions of leaving spirits unrested. The night had settled in with a dense, oppressive gloom, the kind that seemed to seep into every crack and crevice of the old mansion I had rented for the evening. As a professor specializing in the interaction between the living and the dead, nights like these were both a blessing and a curse. The air was thick with rain sounds, a steady rhythm that only added to the sense of dread I felt. It was as if the weather itself was warning me of the night's impending events. I set up my equipment in the dimly lit study, the room bathed in the faint glow of an old desk lamp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. I had a unique ability to help spirits find peace, but tonight's task was particularly daunting. A young ghost named Alina had contacted me, seeking justice for a death that had been both sudden and unjust. The gravity of her request weighed heavily on me as I prepared for what lay ahead. Alina's tragic story was simple yet haunting. She had died in a car accident, her life cut short in a way that left her spirit restless. As a ghost whisperer, I knew that spirits who remained in our world too long risked losing their humanity. The gods Nyx, Gaia, and Hades all played their parts in regulating the boundary between the living and the dead. But sometimes their influence wasn't enough. Tonight, it was up to me to bridge that gap. The mansion's cold, dark corridors were a stark contrast to the warmth and safety of my usual surroundings. Each room seemed to hold its own secret, and the echo of my footsteps felt like a prelude to the unknown. I felt a chill that was not just from the weather, but from the anticipation of what was to come. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of countless bedtime stories and scary tales, all converging into this single tense moment. As I prepared to reach out to Alina, the room seemed to grow colder. The steady rain sounds outside were now accompanied by the occasional gust of wind that moaned through the house, creating an eerie symphony. I closed my eyes and began to focus, knowing that what lay ahead would challenge the very essence of my beliefs and abilities. The room grew colder as I sank into a meditative state, my thoughts swirling with the weight of my task. The rain sounds outside seemed to heighten, the rhythmic drumming on the roof creating a backdrop of tension that matched the stillness of the room. My breaths came in measured, deliberate intervals as I concentrated on opening a channel to the spirit world. It wasn't long before I felt a presence. Alina's spirit emerged softly, a flicker of light in the darkness. Her form was faint but unmistakable, a young woman, her eyes filled with a sorrow that transcended the physical realm. She had been waiting for this moment, just as I had. Her desperation was palpable, and her voice, when she spoke, was a whisper that seemed to echo both in the room and in my mind. "Help me," she pleaded. Her voice was barely more than a breath, but it carried the weight of her anguish. "I need justice for what happened to me. They need to know it wasn't my fault." I could see her more clearly now, her features etched with the pain of her final moments. She was not just a ghost, but a remnant of a life cut short, her humanity slipping away with each passing day she lingered. It was a reality I had encountered before, spirits trapped between worlds, losing their essence as they clung to unresolved issues. "Tell me what happened," I said gently, my voice steady despite the growing sense of dread. I needed to understand the full scope of her story to help her find peace. Her tale was one of sudden tragedy, a car accident caused by another driver's negligence. It wasn't just the loss of her life that troubled her, but the fact that the truth of her death remained hidden. Her story reduced to whispers and rumors. The wind outside seemed to pick up, and the house creaked in protest as Alina's story unfolded. It was a painful narrative, filled with moments of fear and confusion. As I listened, I felt a deepening sense of responsibility. Helping Alina meant more than just easing her spirit. It meant confronting the consequences of her untimely death and ensuring that her story was heard. The tension in the room was a mix of fear and determination, the kind that only true horror stories can evoke. The longer I listened to Alina, the more the reality of her situation set in. The details of her accident were clear now. A sudden collision, a careless driver, and a life lost in a flash. The anguish in her voice was a reminder of the harsh truth. Spirits like Alina didn't just seek closure. They needed justice to be acknowledged. The rain sounds outside continued their relentless rhythm, as if nature itself were mourning with her. As Alina's story unfolded, it became clear that her death was not an isolated tragedy. The careless driver who caused the accident had continued living, their life unblemished by the consequences of their actions. Alina's spirit, meanwhile, had been left to wander, her unresolved grief tying her to the world of the living. It was a stark reminder of how the living and the dead were often unfairly disconnected. I knew that resolving Alina's situation meant more than just comforting her. I had to ensure that her story was not just heard but acted upon. The truth needed to be exposed, and justice needed to be pursued. My role as a ghost whisperer was to bridge the gap between the dead and the living, but it was the living who needed to carry out the actions that would bring about real change. The room felt increasingly oppressive as Elena's tale reached its climax. The weight of her unfulfilled desires and the injustice she suffered hung heavily in the air. The oppressive atmosphere was filled with a sense of urgency, and the pressure to resolve her plight grew with every passing minute. The night outside continued to be a backdrop of darkness and rain, amplifying the mood of dread and determination. The key to helping Elena lay not only in listening but in ensuring that her story was made known. As I prepared to take the next steps, I felt the gravity of my task more acutely. It wasn't just about aiding the spirit, it was about correcting a wrong and ensuring that the injustice of her death would be acknowledged. The night's darkness seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of our efforts. The cold night wrapped around the mansion as I made my final preparations. Elena's spirit was still by my side, her form less ethereal and more solid, a sign of her mounting hope. I had gathered all the information I needed, and now it was time to take action. The rain sounds outside were a constant reminder of the urgency of our mission. The first step was to contact the authorities. I had the information about the negligent driver and the circumstances of Elena's accident ready to go. I knew that delivering this information wasn't just about making a report. It was about ensuring that the truth was faced and justice was pursued. I made the call, my heart pounding as I explained the situation to the officer on the other end. I could almost hear Elena's silent encouragement, her presence a steady force in the cold night. As I spoke with the authorities, I could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The rain outside continued, but its rhythm seemed to match the heartbeat of the resolution taking shape. The officer promised to look into the details, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Elena's story was moving from the realm of ghosts and nightmares to something tangible, something that could bring about real change. The final task was to ensure Elena's spirit could find peace. I spoke to her softly, reassuring her that her story was now in the hands of those who could seek justice. Her form began to fade, her sadness slowly replaced by a sense of relief. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the cold that had settled in the room seemed to dissipate with her departure. As Elena's presence vanished, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The night's darkness began to recede, and the rain sounds outside softened to a gentle patter. The mansion, once a place of fear and tension, now felt like a sanctuary of resolved issues. I knew that her story had been heard and that justice was on its way. The night ended with a sense of calm, a fitting end to a night filled with true ghost horror and the echoes of a restless spirit finally finding peace. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.